the Salt Lake City Planning Commission. Today's date is Wednesday, May 22nd, 2024. The Planning Commission consists of residents from each Salt Lake City district that are appointed in a manner providing balanced geographic, professional, neighborhood, and community interest representation. The Planning Commission reviews and acts on any changes to the city's general plans, small area plans, special studies, zoning ordinances, and zoning district maps. The Commission also reviews and acts on planned unit developments, conditional uses, and certain subdivisions. Our goal is to provide a welcoming and safe environment for everyone. We ask that those in attendance adhere to a few ground rules. 1, silence or turn off your cell phones. 2, respect the person speaking and do not interrupt or do other things that would intimidate or deter others from exercising their right to be heard. Clapping, cheering, jeering, shouting, or other actions used to discourage people who have different opinions from participating will not be tolerated. People who attempt to diminish someone else's input may be removed from the room. 3, if you wish to speak, come to the microphone once the public hearing has been opened and state your name. Members of the public will have 2 minutes to comment. Your time cannot be combined with someone else's time. Everyone will get the same amount of time to speak so that we can ensure everyone is treated equally. If you are a representative of an officially registered recognized organization and the item you wish to speak on is within the boundaries of your organization, you will be given 5 minutes. If it is outside of your boundaries, you will be given 2 minutes. 4, if you have a handout that you want the commission to see, you will need to leave copies because they become part of the legal record. 5, when commenting, speak clearly, keep your comments on topic and brief. 6, questions asked during a public hearing will not be answered during the public hearing. Rather, the commission may ask the applicant or staff to answer questions after the public hearing is closed, or ask city staff to follow up with you at a later time. We will go ahead and move to the report of the chair and the vice chair. The chair has nothing to report.
Nothing to report. Looking forward for tonight and the upcoming vice chair nomination. Thank you.
Thanks. We'll go to the report of the director.
All right. To give you some updates on some council activity from last night, they had a number of items on their agenda that were up for decision. The biggest one were the ballpark areas rezones, and that was the creation of the MU8 zone. They did adopt those last night, and we'll remind at the briefing item at the end, we'll go over those again, what that is. Not in too much detail since it wasn't that long ago that the Planning Commission reviewed that. They also approved a couple of other rezones, one on State Street and around, I think about 1900 South, that went to RMU with some zoning, with some conditions on it. And then another one along Main Street that is in the ballpark area as well. And then they approved one more, which was a smaller map amendment. Oh, it was a D2 to D1, which you saw not too long ago, a couple months ago. And I think that-that's about all I have to report on. Well, one thing that we should make, just I think the word is out, but the D4 zoning changes that are associated with the sports, entertainment, cultural, and convention district, as it's called now, those were postponed from tonight to June 12th, just so everybody who may be here for that. We did send out a notice, I believe, to all the property owners and residents in the D4 zone, so they were aware of that, but wanted to make that announcement too. Thank you.
Thank you. We will move to our open forum. If there was anything that any commissioners would like to discuss. It doesn't look like we have anything to discuss. Let's go ahead and move to the consent agenda. We have two items. The first item is plan development for 220 Main townhomes at approximately 220 and 230 South Main Street. Case number PLN PCM 2023-00891. And we also have the approval of the meeting minutes from April 24th and May 8th. Let's go ahead and open the public hearing on that one item, the plan development for 2020 Main townhomes at approximately 2020 and 2030 South Main Street. If there's anyone here who would like to speak on that item, go ahead and approach the microphone. Have we received any emails on this?
We have not.
Thank you. We will go ahead and close the public hearing on the consent agenda and come back to the, bring it back to the commission to approve the consent agenda, or a motion to amend the consent agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I second.
We have a motion to approve the consent agenda from Commissioner Burrows and a second from Commissioner Santos Rivera. Any discussion to the motion? Let's go ahead and take a vote. And if you are abstaining from the minutes, state which meeting you were absent from. Commissioner Gale.
I'll abstain on the May 8th meeting minutes as I was not in attendance, and yes on the others.
Commissioner Berry.
Yes.
Commissioner Burrows.
Yes.
Commissioner Scheer.
Yes.
Commissioner Scott.
Yes.
Commissioner Tuttle.
Yes.
Commissioner Santos Rivera.
I will abstain for both minutes since I was absent, and yes to the consent agenda.
And the chair will also vote yes. That passes unanimously with 2 abstentions on May 8th and 1 abstention on April 24th. We will go ahead and move to the regular agenda. Our first item is plan development modifications for 144 South apartments at approximately 144 South, 500 East. Case number PLN PCM 2021-00698. And our planner is Brooke Olson.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, one moment while I rearrange everything once again.
And Brooke, your presentation isn't.
Oh. Okay, thank you. This is a request for modifications to an approved plan development, 144 South Apartments, which previously received approval by the Planning Commission on October 13th, 2021. The subject property is located at 144 South, 500 East within the RMU residential mixed-use zone. The approval was for a mixed-use building containing 53 studio units and 57 one-bedroom units reserved for renters at 60% or less of the area median income. The applicant, 144 South Apartments LLC, is now requesting 3 modifications to the approved plans. One is to remove the privacy fencing along the south property line and extend the height of the parking structure concrete wall. The second is to remove the 6-foot tall wooden privacy fence from the west property line and leave the existing 7-foot tall corrugated metal fencing on the west property line. And third, to remove the landscape buffer requirement from the west boundary of the surface parking area. And staff is recommending the Planning Commission approve the modification 1 and deny modifications 2 and 3. This is a rendering of the east facade of the development, which is currently under construction. The approval process for modifications to approved development plans associated with planned developments is specified in 21A 55-100. Administrative approval is limited to minor modifications in light of technical or engineering considerations. The modifications proposed by the applicant are beyond what is permitted for administrative review. Therefore, the Planning Commission review and approval is required. Next, I'll touch on the requested modifications. First, the applicant is requesting to remove the privacy fencing along the south property line and extend the height of the parking structure concrete wall, as the parking structure wall height provides sufficient screening between the parking area and the adjacent properties to the south. The wall height varies from 6 feet to 10 feet on the interior and 8 feet to 10 feet on the exterior. So staff is of the opinion the modification is minimal, meets applicable plan development standards, and is recommending approval of this modification. Next is a modification to remove the 6-foot tall wood privacy fence required by the Planning Commission from the west property line and preserve the existing 7-foot 2-inch tall corrugated metal fencing on the west property line. The applicant has indicated they would like to preserve the metal fencing because it adds a unique architectural feature to the property. This is an image of the existing fence. Staff is recommending denial of this modification as the existing fencing material and height does not meet the city's fence regulations for residential districts or the applicable plan development standards. The city's fence regulations prohibit materials not typically used, designated, manufactured for fencing such as metal roofing panels, corrugated or sheet metal, tarps, or plywood. Additionally, fence height in residential zones is limited to 6 feet behind the primary facade of the building. And staff is of the opinion that retention of the fence is not consistent with Plan Development Standard C, Design and Compatibility, which require that the plan development is compatible with the area and is designed to achieve a more enhanced project than would be achievable through strict application of the land use regulations. Therefore, staff recommends denial of the modification. Next, the last request is to remove the landscape buffer requirement from the west boundary of the surface parking area, which was required by the Commission as a condition of approval. The applicant indicated they're requesting the modification as they do not wish to cover the fence, that any plantings would mostly not be visible and have little daylight. The applicant further indicated that the retaining wall along the fence line could potentially be compromised by water required for the plantings. When the Commission initially reviewed the plan development proposal in 2021, one of the modifications the applicant requested was removal of the 7-foot wide landscape buffer required around the perimeter of the surface parking area. The modification was approved by the Planning Commission subject to a condition that a landscape buffer shall be installed around or on the 6-foot tall wood privacy fence located around the perimeter of the surface parking area. Per the Commission's discussion, the condition was intended to provide landscaping and greenery around the perimeter of the parking area, but allow flexibility in terms of landscaping width and curb. To meet the condition, the applicant initially proposed installing a narrow landscape bed approximately a foot in width with Japanese honeysuckle climbing vine as highlighted in the approved plan. Staff is of the opinion removing the landscaping along the west property line is inconsistent with Plan Development Standard D, that the proposed plan development preserves, maintains, or provides native landscaping where appropriate. The perimeter landscaping provides numerous environmental and aesthetic benefits, enhances the project, and helps lessen impacts created by the proposed development. Removal of the landscaping from the west property line would significantly reduce the already limited living vegetation provided on site. And various small drought-tolerant plant species can tolerate full shade and very minimal water. Additionally, drip irrigation systems can be installed to apply small amounts of water directly to the root zones of the plants. Therefore, planning staff recommends denial of this modification. And just to reiterate, planning staff recommends the Planning Commission approve modification number 1 and deny modifications 2 and 3. And that concludes my presentation. And the applicant is also in attendance and here to speak to their request as well.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and have the applicant come forward. Shoulder surgery.
You can go ahead and sit here.
And state your name for the record, please.
Peter Corroon, one of the owners and developers of the project. First of all, thanks Brooke for her report. I can't believe how much work she put into it. Thanks to the commission for your service. I always say one thing I would never be was a planning commissioner. So thank you for your service. So on modification 1, that's the picture right there. That's what it looks like. And that wall again is, was it 6 to 10 feet on the outside, and then or 8 to 10 feet on the outside, and then I think 6 to about 12 feet on the inside. So putting a wood fence on top of that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So we'd ask not to have to put one there, and the cars are blocked from view on the inside. So we appreciate Brooke's recommendation on modification number 1. And then number 2 is the next one. That's the fence before it got tagged, so it looks a little bit better. Although I have to say I don't mind the graffiti either. It does sort of look pretty cool. But that's the fence that's there. It's behind the building. It's about 15 feet from the back of the building. We actually think it looks pretty cool. And then if you look on the other side of it, which is the next picture, that's what it looks like on the back side. So if the intent is to sort of shield the project from the neighbor, that's what's been there for probably 20 years. And the neighbor actually sent me an email the other day saying he doesn't oppose what we have there. He says, "You can record us as having no objection to your revisions." So he's okay with us not removing that corrugated fence. Also, it's located on that wooden bracket there. So if we wanted to put up a fence, we couldn't put it on their side because it's not our property. So we'd have to remove the corrugated fence and just put it up on our side. So it doesn't really do the neighbor any good to have the wood fence there. And then and the next picture is regarding modification number 3. Well, this one and I guess it's the same one. We can leave it. So again, any plantings we put would not benefit the neighbor on the other side of the fence here. So the plantings would only be seen from our side, and there'd be cars parked in front of them, and there's very little daylight that would be in the back behind the building. And then also that's the wall on the other side, and I'm as a former civil engineer, water and retaining walls are not my favorite. So if we could avoid having to put water there, we would appreciate it. So that's our modification number 3. Thank you for your time. If you have any questions, happy to answer them.
Thank you. Any questions from the commission? Let's go ahead and open the public hearing. If there's anyone who would like to give comment on this item, go ahead and approach the microphone. Have we received any emails?
We have not.
We will go ahead and close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission for discussion and a motion.
Chair, can I ask, members of the commission that were here when this was approved in, whenever it was approved, October 13th, 2021, or staff, have any of the conditions changed on the property since, like, is the corrugated fence, was it there when this was approved in 2021?
Yeah, the fence was existing, and what was approved through the plan development was to replace it with the 6-foot tall wooden privacy fence.
Okay.
Can I just add a comment there?
That's my
So-
question.
So yeah, I mean, the fence was there, and when we first started building, we thought we'd replace it, and then as we started going down the path, we thought this doesn't actually look too bad, and we're trying to build a hip building to attract people downtown. So we thought it might look good just to leave it.
Yeah, I think just in terms of discussion, I think the first two amendments make sense to me. I think I get the first one that staff has recommended. I kind of agree on the second one that I think that looks fine. And oftentimes the wood fences that come out otherwise do kind of look crappy and generic. So I like seeing something a little different. But then I think that it also makes sense to keep the landscaping requirement, because I mean that's just how it is in all parking lots, and it's easy enough to get kind of a drip system there that doesn't have any kind of effect on the structure. So yeah.
Commissioner Scott, can I ask you to speak closer to your microphone when you comment?
Yep.
Thank you.
I have a question. So for modification number 2, it says, and I quote, the metal fencing, it adds a unique architectural feature to the property, unquote. I wonder what framework are you using that features or architectural elements about this fence?
No, just as it is. I mean, again, we just think it looks pretty cool as a corrugated fence in the back there. Where originally, we thought a wooden fence probably would look better. We think this actually looks pretty good, and it's sort of unique, and we may paint it or do something cool with it. So, and that's the other reason we prefer not to have the plantings, unless they were just low plantings, would be so we could see the fence and see whatever we put on it.
I think just to clarify a little bit, when we first looked at this project, we were very amenable to a lot of things because it was a very affordable project, and it still is. And so this was the back fence was not something, or the landscape was not something that we really spent a lot of time on. So, more concerned with the facade and parking, and why the parking was required, and an affordable building, and blah blah blah. But there were a lot of things that had to do with HUD requirements and so forth, as I recall. But so I'm with Commissioner Scott that I believe the first two are fine, and the third landscape buffer should be kept.
Is anyone ready to make a motion?
I'm not, but I just want to remind, if you are going to make a motion contrary to staff's on condition 2, you need to stipulate which standards you actually believe are met and articulate that in your motion.
I'll make a motion. So on the information presented in discussion, I move that the commission approve the plan development modification number 1 and deny modifications number 2 and number 3 as recommended by staff.
I'll second that.
We have a motion from Commissioner Gale and a second from Commissioner Barry. Any discussion to the motion? Let's go ahead and take a vote. Commissioner Tuttle,
Yes.
Commissioner Scott,
No.
Commissioner Shear,
No.
Commissioner Burrows,
No.
Commissioner Barry,
Yes.
Commissioner Gale,
Yes.
Commissioner Santos Rivera,
Yes.
and the chair will vote no. That motion fails 4-4. And we will look for another motion.
I'll do a motion if you give me a minute to,
Okay.
if somebody else beats me to making one up. That's okay.
So I think we're in agreement. We want to deny the third one, but we can approve the first two. I think we can just scope it down with what are we in consensus and agreement, if that helps.
No, you need to articulate on condition number 2 the standards that you believe are met.
Yeah.
And articulate that in the motion.
Am I allowed to mention something?
Give us just a second to work on this motion.
How, can I ask how tall the corrugated fence is? It's 8 feet? 8 feet?
7 feet?
7 feet 2 inches.
7 feet, yeah.
Can I ask if the attorney sees a standard that we might look for maintaining the aesthetics or?
I have one if you need.
What to?
I'll let the commissioner create their own motion if you've already found a standard, but I'll look for one too if you want.
Oh, sorry. No, I was gonna. If you have it, go.
Go ahead.
Oh, I don't have the motion. I was gonna ask another question. So. Well, I was just gonna say. So. The plan development comes with, or the thing is, if it would achieve a more enhanced product than would be achievable through strict application land use regulation, is that not a standard? That's the end result, or does citing that work? That is? Okay. Then let's just do that.
That is an enhanced project. You got it? You got it?
I don't have the thing. I haven't made a motion yet, so I'm not sure if I'll do it
Oh.
right.
I'll try.
Go ahead.
I move that the commission approve this plan development application because evidence has been presented that demonstrates the proposal complies with the following standards with the following conditions. Request number 2, I'll accept as the staff has found for request number 1 and number 3, and number 2 seems to meet standard 21A.55.050 3A. The condition, just A, that the product would result in a more enhanced product than would be achievable through strict application of the land use regulations due to
Second.
the aesthetics and.
We have a motion from Commissioner Burrows and a second from Commissioner Shear. Any discussion to the motion? And to clarify, the motion is approval of modifications 1 and 2 and denial of modification 3. That's
Correct.
correct. Okay. We'll go ahead and take a vote. Commissioner Gale,
No.
Commissioner Barry,
No.
Commissioner Burrows,
Yes.
Commissioner Tuttle,
Yes.
Commissioner Scott,
Yes.
Commissioner Shear,
Yes.
Commissioner Santos Rivera,
Yes.
and the chair also votes yes. That motion passes 6-2.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
2 out of 3 ain't bad.
We will move to item number 3, preliminary subdivision and plan development for Kerrigan View Phase 2 at approximately 1820 and 1822 South Lakeline Drive and 1937 and 1939 South Scenic Drive.
Chair, we're actually going to be
Oh, wait.
doing the Glendale Townhomes.
You're on the wrong agenda item. Number 2.
Thanks.
There you go.
I was going a little too fast there. Sorry about that. Number 2, continuation of plan development modification for Glendale Townhomes at approximately 1179 South Navajo Street, case number PLN PCM 2021-00378. And our planner is Eric Dems.
Thank you, members of the commission. This item is for plan development modifications similar to the presentation you just had for the Glendale Townhomes. This was originally brought before you and approved in February 2022, and then there was an extension granted in February 2023. Due to changing market conditions and the presence of a large utility easement at the back of the property, the applicant has proposed to make some modifications. Originally, it came to the Planning Commission for a plan development due to the 4 of the buildings that are circled here in red being located or without frontage on a public street. So the things that have changed since your last approval is the applicant has proposed to increase the unit count from 53 to 74. They've eliminated private amenities such as a pickleball court, barbecue pits, and a playground that were located in the public utility easement. They've increased surface parking by 20 stalls. And then they've also created a subdivision plat independently that would allow these units to be sellable rather than just rentals. With these modifications, they also shuffled the unit styles to accommodate the additional unit count. Staff is recommending approval of these modifications, subject to removing 10 surface stalls and returning them to landscape open space. So this is a project summary about the project. It's 2.37 acres. The buildings are 3 stories, 28 feet tall, and they're residential townhomes. Proposed as 74 units. All are 2-bedroom units. 31 of them would have live workspace, those on Navajo and Glendale, and are facing those 2 streets. And the exterior material, brick, wood siding, glass, cementitious plaster. And then they're proposing 114 stalls, where 74 were required. 76 of those are in garages and 38 on the surface. These plan development objectives are a carryover from the original approval. They listed 2 that staff felt that it met: master plan implementation to increase the housing density in the area, so long as it was still compatible in scale, and also it talks about encouraging local business growth and development, and they do that by providing the 31 live-work units. It also meets the goals for housing by providing unit styles not typically found in the area, by one having, these are still ownable units with a common yard area, and then that wouldn't need to be maintained. So it's a different scale than the predominantly single-family homes found in the area, and then also by the inclusion of 31 live-work units. So this is the original plan that you approved in 2022 with 57 units, and you can see the amenity space with the playground and pickleball court and things like that were in the public utility easement. Public Utilities Department, through the course of permits, came back and realized that that was going to be too excessive for the access that they needed to have in that area, and so they asked for those items to be removed, and that nothing more than either surface parking or basic landscaping be provided in that area. This is the current proposal, and again, it's in yellow. You can see where that public utility easement is at the rear of the property. So the unit counts or the unit styles again have been shuffled, still the 2-bedroom, but most have gone to a single parking stall, same basic footprints, but of course more of them. And then again, you can see the units on Navajo Street and Glendale Drive that would still have live-work units. Staff still feels that this meets the original objectives for a planned development, but feels that with these unique unit types to the area, that it's still important that there be as much green space as possible for playground for children, for a play area, play surface for children and families. And so where this proposal, where only 74 parking stalls are required, and this is providing in excess of that, staff is recommending that 10 of those surface stalls be removed to provide additional landscape area for the residents. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and have the applicant present. State your name for the record.
Pierre Long with Axis Architects.
Thank you.
Let's see here.
So after feedback from the community during the first plan development, we heard that they wanted more affordable units and for sale. So we were able to redesign the project, make the units a little smaller, and go from 57. I think the previous slide said 53, but it went from 57 to 74 for sale. We're also subdividing them so that they can be sold as single-family residences, which is a lot easier for homeowners to get a loan as opposed to a condo plat. And we heard from the commission that even though you wanted more parking, you also wanted more amenities. So we actually reorganized the plans with, so this area had all the community gardens, and we relocated, we have a 7-foot buffer that we increased to 15 feet. And then we relocated the community gardens. So we have 15 feet of landscape, then a sidewalk. And so we relocated the community gardens along this north edge. And this freed up some space to add a children's playground and an outdoor exercise area. Then we relocated the barbecue area at the end of the central courtyard here. So at each end of these, that's a barbecue area, and that's a barbecue area. So with your comments, we were able to actually move things around instead of losing amenities. Again, the master plan that was approved in 2014 states that the first step specifically on this intersection is to create higher density housing. And so we're right along with this goal. I would also point out, if it's possible, or if the Planning Commission still has questions on the ratio of parking versus amenity, that perhaps the staff and Axis Architects could work together to achieve that goal.
Thank you. Any questions from the commission? Let's go ahead and open the public hearing on this item. If anyone would like to make a comment on it, please go ahead and approach the microphone. Have we received any emails?
No emails. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission for discussion and a motion.
Chair, I have a question for staff. I wonder if staff has seen this latest iteration of the plans.
So this iteration you're seeing right here was sent in after the publication of the staff report.
Okay.
It wouldn't necessarily change staff's recommendation.
Okay.
The outdoor gym equipment listed here would still need to have public utilities review it to sign off. Regardless, we just see it as green space and recommend approval based on that and with the same conditions as before.
I think people are going to get really upset if their tomatoes are torn up by public utilities.
I can see that.
Is the 7-foot landscape buffer, and then where they have like a linear neighborhood garden, is that the same kind of depth as the one
Yeah,
that we
that's
saw
the same.
before?
That's the same width as
Okay.
was previously
Okay.
reviewed. This is just a relocation of those planter boxes.
And adding the barbecue in the middle, barbecue spaces. So I like this better, but I think, like you said, probably the staff suggestion that 10 of those spaces go back to green space makes sense to me.
I would like to just dive a little deeper into the parking issue, and maybe staff or the applicant can answer the question of how many parking spaces are within the buildings. How many parking spaces are within the buildings?
So it's I can show that on my presentation. So there's 76 within the building.
Okay.
So 2 of the units have 2 car garages. Everything else has a single car garage.
Okay.
And the rest are surface.
Okay. And then
All units are
how
2.
many extra parking spaces are in the site plan currently?
38 surface.
38?
Yes.
Okay. So if we reduced it by 10, that would still give 28 additional parking spaces for use by the residents. Okay. I'm willing to make a motion concerning PLN PCM 2021-00378. Based on the information presented in discussion, I move that the commission approve this plan development application as recommended by staff.
I'll second. Oh, yours, Amy.
We have a motion from Commissioner Scheer and a second from Commissioner Barry. Any discussion to the motion? Let's take a vote. Commissioner Barry,
Yes.
Commissioner Scheer,
Yes.
Commissioner Burrows,
Yes.
Commissioner Tuttle,
Yes.
Commissioner Gale,
Yes.
Commissioner Scott,
Yes.
Commissioner Santos Rivera,
Yes.
and the chair also votes yes. That passes unanimously.
Mr. Chair, can I clarify something on the next business item? So
Go ahead.
for item number 3, I think new motions have been put in the Dropbox. Is that for both the subdivision and the plan development?
Yes.
There's new motions. Thank you.
Yes. And for real this time, we will move to item number 3, preliminary subdivision and plan development for Kerrigan View Phase 2 at approximately 1820 and 1822 South Lakeline Drive and 1937 and 1939 South Scenic Drive. Case numbers PLN PCM 2023-00890 and case number PLN SUB 2024-00219. And just again to clarify, we do have new motion sheets in there.
Mr. Chair, I only see a motion sheet for the plan development, not a replacement for the subdivision.
You may need to refresh because both plan development and preliminary subdivision are in there now, and both are recommending that we make a motion to continue, which is based on information that's going to be in the presentation.
I only have one motion. He agrees. I only have one motion. I just did it, but yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. And our planner is Eric Dams.
Thank you. So this is a two-part request, and that are interrelated. The first is for the plan development. The request is for 3 residential lots to front a private rather than public street, and lot 3 is 50 feet wide at the front setback, where 100 foot would be required. Lots 2 and 3 include portions of their buildable area within slopes that exceed 30%, and the private road would include construction across man-made slopes that exceed 30%. The preliminary subdivision is before you, just because it's required in conjunction with the plan development request, but then also subdivisions are required to meet underlying zoning, so it too would have these same conditions or requests. So as was mentioned, some new information has come to light, and that has modified the request or the recommendation that's in your staff report. Some of the items staff has still recommended. I've recommended a fence to be installed on the north side of Kerrigan Rim Court, adjacent to the trail. The fence to be wood or metal with a design that's wildlife friendly, deters graffiti, and does not obscure public views to the south. A minimum 6-foot wide trail be provided north of Kerrigan Rim Court. That's for the Bonneville Shoreline Trail, and to be acceptably engineered so as to not be impacted by water runoff, and that any areas disturbed during construction be revegetated with native plants. However, since publication of the staff report, there has been additional concern brought up regarding the expansion of the buildable areas into the 30% slope area and the potential of the precedents that may set. So staff's recommending that potential impacts and alternatives to that be explored further. So the recommendation is that the item be continued, both the plan development and preliminary subdivision reviews pending further investigation of the allowance of development within the 30% slope area. So this is giving you a view of where this is located. This is the top of Lakeline Drive, running from Lakeline Drive to headed towards the H Rock. And the area in light yellow here is zoned FR2. The remainder is open space. These are some views of the property looking southeast. First off, you can see some of it is relatively level ground, but there is some slope and some variation in the hillside. And this area is looking an area that would potentially be designated for a future trailhead parking lot that we'll talk about. And then again, some additional views. This is looking across at the property from Lakeline Drive. It's the area just north of the existing home there. And again, some different views of the trail and access road that's there. Access road being for a water line, but also functioning as the section of Bonneville Shoreline Trail that connects to the H-Rock. So to give a little bit of background, this originally was presented, there was an original subdivision that was approved but never recorded that included 3 residential lots, but it did not include public open space. And you can see the green through lot 2 here, that's the shoreline trail. It would have probably required the realignment of the shoreline trail, as that could have developed as residential. And again, the plat was never recorded. Later we recorded a 33-foot water line easement in the location where the shoreline trail now resides. And that easement doubles as the shoreline surface. And it's basically a dirt road. The current proposal is as shown here. It still has 3 residential lots, but they are located south of the trail here below it, downhill. And this area in gray is all zoned FR2, so they're in the residentially zoned area. And then it proposes access via private street, Kerrigan Rim Court, which follows here, and cul-de-sacs to the west. And it would include the area in red would be sold to Salt Lake Public Lands for perpetual open space for the preservation of the Bonneville Shoreline Trail. And also the idea is that there would be a future trailhead amenity area approximately in this area just off of Lakeline Drive here, where it's the flattest area. This would also include the preservation of a 10-foot wide corridor for the Bonneville Shoreline Trail, largely where it presently exists. And then this area in blue would be a large remainder parcel that would just remain in open space and would be mostly a combination of property lines that are already there. So looking at this, the total property is approximately 32 acres. 12 of those acres, these areas shown in blue, would become public open space, and 28 total acres would become open space with the 3 residential lots shown here. And although there's not specific development of the homes proposed or the trailhead right now, eventually the idea is that 3 residential homes would be developed, and if funding were secured in the future, trailhead parking in an amenity area. So looking at the 2 different portions, first the plan development request and the standards for a plan development. 1, it must meet the purpose statement for a plan development and achieve at least 1 plan development objective, and demonstrate why these modifications are necessary or couldn't otherwise be met using the base zoning, and then to result in a more enhanced product than would be achievable if they just followed the base zoning standards. So looking at this, they're proposing actually to meet 2 objectives. First is towards the open space and natural lands, and by preserving protection and creation of open space for the shoreline trail and the area to the north. And then it also talks about clustering development to preserve the open space, which they would also accomplish by clumping the residential development all on the downhill side of the trail rather than spread across it. As outlined in your staff report, this would accomplish numerous goals found within the master plans, both for Plan Salt Lake and the East Bench Master Plan, primarily through the preservation of the foothill trails and trailhead and this open space. Also looking at this, if they were not to go through a plan development process, it would largely make these properties that are already FR2 zoned inaccessible. It would be more difficult to extend the public street there with different standards across the property, and it would probably impact the Bonneville Shoreline Trail, where there's some steep slope to deal with. It would put that in somewhat jeopardy as to where that could be located, and would kind of render these properties undevelopable. And also, if they were to go with the other arrangement, it would not protect the open space in the same manner, and it would not preserve views like this one would. And there are still some things that need to be worked out, and they're reflected in the original recommendations from staff. The trail currently, the cross section for the trail also is proposed currently to double as a drainage channel to capture water runoff from the hill above, which wouldn't work because that would create a lot of rutting and things like that. And so staff is recommending that that be re-engineered and work with engineering, transportation, and public lands to come up with an acceptably engineered cross-section for that to handle both any potential runoff and to create the best trail surface possible. Looking at the subdivision, the standards for a subdivision are, there are specific design standards listed in chapter 20.26, and then it deals with all of the utilities and infrastructure needed, water, sewage, any other utilities, easements, and infrastructure for both public utilities and for private utilities. It deals with the drainage, stormwater, erosion controls, and make sure that the subdivision is compliant with those standards. It also deals with access and infrastructure needed for the fire department to safely service the property, and looks at any public dedications that need to be made, and verifies that that no injury or harm to other persons or property will be maintained through the creation of the subdivision. In looking at that, staff felt that it was that by creating the public street, the Kerrigan Rim Court, that one, that it continues the public easement, the 33-foot wide easement for the water line across there, and the first half of this here would have a public utility or a public easement that would access, so the public could come along here with the trail and also any future trailhead feature that was there, and then the road would have a gate through it, and the last half and the cul-de-sac would be private just for the residents. But to the north of that, of the entire roadway, would be a fence that would separate the shoreline trail from the private street. And again, staff is recommending and making recommendations on the design of that fence. And then at the end of the cul-de-sac, there would be another gate, and the easement for the water line easement would continue, and access would continue further west as it currently extends. And so, and then of course, the creation of this plat would allow for the sale of the land to Salt Lake Public Lands to be able to dedicate this open space, public open space, and officially preserve the trail. There are, of course, a few concerns related to the environmental controls and slope side development that come into play. These would be reviewed. There are numerous processes in place, either through final plat, through construction improvement drawings, and through building code or building permit review that would come into place to ensure that all the standards were met. And of course, those are standard with any approval. But as was mentioned in the beginning, we do feel that maybe there's some additional analysis that needs to take place related to the slope side development here. You can see this, the green line kind of designates areas, or the perimeter of the 30% slope. So the areas in red are 30% slope. And so there are portions of each of these buildable lots, more so on lot 3 and lot 2, that are proposed to cross that 30% slope area. And even though these are just buildable areas, it might not be physically what gets built. We're concerned potentially about the impacts that may have, how it could be engineered, and the precedents that may set, and want a little bit of time to examine that a little further and present additional information. So looking at the next steps, of course, if there were approval, applicant would have to comply with the conditions of approval. They have to meet all department comments. That's always part of it. They'd have to submit for final plat, and then any major modifications would require planning commission approval. If it were denied, the applicant could still develop the residential portions with the FR2 standards, but they could not be accessed from the private road. They could not encroach into the 30% slope areas. And again, kind of as explained, it might be more advantageous to develop in the original proposal with some of them being the 2 lots being upslope of the shoreline trail or crossing it. And then again, the open space land would not need to be dedicated as public open space, and it would probably jeopardize any future trailhead and amenities. And those reviews, so long as they just met the underlying standards, would just be handled administratively. But again, just reiterating, staff does feel that although there's significant public benefit to this project, we would like the opportunity to explore the expansion of buildable areas into the 30% slope area further. So we're recommending a continuation of both the plan development and preliminary subdivision, pending further investigation of the allowance of those development within those 30% slope areas. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and have the applicant come forward and state your name for the record.
Do you want any maps?
That's right. Hi, my name's Adam Turville, and thank you, Eric, and thank you for the chance to discuss this proposal. As the community members know who are present and others, my family has owned this property for quite some time, over 25 years. And throughout that process, there have been different versions of plans and different iterations. Eric mentioned the previous subdivision proposal, which was approved but never recorded. That was, unfortunately, my dad, who originally got that approval, was in a terrible car accident shortly thereafter, and since then his health has declined. So for the past 20 years, nothing's happened on this property, and I've taken over trying to find a great solution for this property over the past 3 or 4 years, and I think this proposal is a really, really great kind of win-win-win solution in discussions with the community, in discussions with the Salt Lake City Public Lands team. and as a small residential development, I think it achieves a lot. So I'll go ahead and comment on Eric's comments on the 32-degree slope exception. As I mentioned, a win-win-win, hopefully, proposal, but that's a delicate balance. And without the ability to cluster the lots in a way that we have here. Actually, Eric, do you mind going back to the slope map? So as you can see here, the area, and I know Eric mentioned this, but just to reiterate, the area in the top right corner is also zoned FR2, and that's the area that was proposed, the area that is yellow. That's the area that was proposed for 2 lots previously. So really the only way this proposal works is by clustering the 3 lots on the south side, or moving 1 or 2 of those lots farther to the top right area. Now, I know the purpose of the 30-degree slope regulations might be to prevent or to mitigate some of the development impacts in the foothills. And in this case, that's exactly what we're trying to do by encroaching on the 30-degree slope a little bit, is preserving the uphill slope, which just happens to be less steep in this case. And so by being able to cluster the lots in the way that we propose on the downhill slope, not only preserves the views for the trail users, but it, more importantly, provides Salt Lake City public lands with the opportunity to purchase that otherwise very developable land closer to the existing Lakeline Drive cul-de-sac. So, as I mentioned, this is a bit of a fragile balance because we have a lot of moving parts here. Our family's been, patient and thorough and kind of bent over backwards, frankly, to try to make this work in a way that both preserves the open space in public perpetuity ownership, as well as preserve the trail experience. And so, as Eric mentioned, if these exceptions aren't granted, we would likely need to go back to the drawing board, find out a plan that does pencil. And given my family's current situation, that's kind of our top priority. Obviously, if we could make it pencil as this proposal does, while also providing a lot of great benefits to the community, we'd love to move forward with that proposal. But we don't have, unfortunately, a lot of time to start this process over. We do, fully intend to comply with all the checks that Eric mentioned that I think will ensure that this is a safe and thorough development. Once we get to the building phase, there will be soil tests and regulations and building permits that will all take into account this 30-degree slope issue. And as Eric mentioned, the precedent, if there's any concerns about setting a precedent, I would just refer back to the purposes of the master plan and the plan development, which in this case we're trying really hard to achieve by preserving the foothills and asking for a slight variation on the downhill slope away from homes and away from the trails. So thank you again for your consideration.
Thank you. Any questions from the commission?
I have a question probably for staff. Does the subdivision plat define the buildable area of each lot? Is that why this is an issue
Yes,
now?
it does. That's correct.
So I wonder, when I was looking at this report, how I didn't notice that the called out buildable area was in a 30% slope zone. Is that kind of is that pointed out in the staff report somewhere?
Yeah.
It is? Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Yes.
Actually, following up with that, I have a question. So I know that the percentage of slope and the percentage of degrees are different. And I'm looking at this specific map in the staff report, and I see there's 100% slope. Does that mean 45 degrees or just greater than 30%? Just want to understand that.
I'm not entirely sure what you're referring to. These maps, our requirements for how these are submitted is this color coded, so it doesn't show by color slopes, if they were 45% or more or something, they just are by these 3 grades. But then the contour lines show additionally beyond that how steep those are.
I know, it's just 30 and above.
Does that answer your question?
Not sure if I'm understanding that.
Commissioner, maybe I can weigh in. So the code refers to a 30% slope. The map, they're required to show any slope that's above that. And so that's why that's labeled 30 to 100%, but it's basically any slope over 30%.
Perfect. So referring to that specific rendering in the staff report, I see that there is a 100% slope. Does that mean just greater than 30 then?
So that's just the range, like 100, right? So the map doesn't need to show increments above 30. It shows everything above 30 has one color.
Perfect. Yeah, that does answer my question. Thank you.
Can I add one more comment?
Go ahead.
And just to these 2 comments on the map, and I understand there's a lot of differing labels in the color coding here, but one thing to note is that the current Bonneville Shoreline Trail, as you'll see, is white or yellow throughout the length of it. We would be selling, if approved, to Salt Lake City the portion that is to the west of the proposed cul-de-sac, that white, what is now a dirt road, the Bonneville Shoreline Trail, and also where there's a public utility easement, which is why we've pushed the lots farther to the south in order to accommodate selling Salt Lake City public lands, the existing Bonneville Shoreline Trail. If we were not to have that exception, that Bonneville Shoreline Trail is has a public utility easement through it, but we would be able to incorporate it into our lots. And so that's been a request from Salt Lake City Public Lands, where we actually bent the property lines to the south to include that portion of the Bonneville Shoreline Trail, so that in the future, they wouldn't have to reconstruct the Bonneville Shoreline Trail farther up the slope, because we would have maintained the current Bonneville Shoreline Trail in private ownership. So that's just a little bit more color, no pun intended with this exhibit here, but a little more color as to why we're pushing a little bit farther to the south. The last point that I'll make on this is there are other little islands, of buildable pad or of slope less than 30 degrees throughout these 3 lots farther to the south. And we've kind of capped the buildable area that we're proposing farther north to exclude some of those, so as not to encroach. There's another row of houses down below, so as not to encroach farther to the south on those houses. So on the one hand, we're asking for an exemption on the over 30 degree slope, and on the other, we're giving up some of the under 30 degree slope there. So
Thank you. Let's go ahead and open the public hearing on this. I realize that our podium over there has been pushed up against the wall, so we need to, or we could have people come to the table.
That microphone's not working, so people need to.
Gotcha. Okay. Anyone who would like to give public comment, go ahead and have a seat here and state your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes. Hit the push button and make sure the green light comes on.
Yes, it's on. My name's Gary Reimer. I live at the north end of Lakeline Drive, 1840 South, on the cul-de-sac, immediately adjacent to the Shoreline Trail, to the trailhead. I'm at ground zero, so I have a lot of interest in this. I support this development. I think it's reasonable and only fair to the developer, and it respects open space and the Bonneville Shoreline Trail and public access to it. We bought our lot 30 years ago and built our home then. We've been there a long time. There were plans for as many as 25 homes at the time, so we expected development. The current plan is 3. So that's quite an improvement for the benefit of the community, and it also is going to increase the open space. Furthermore, the lots have been consolidated together on the downhill side of the trail in a proposed street, making them much less obtrusive to the area versus being sprinkled up and down above and below the street as previously proposed. I think this is an improvement. It puts them all together. Public access to the trail and to the foothills will be preserved and actually enhanced, in my view, with more open space added. And finally, this plan is part of a larger plan that will move the trailhead beyond the cul-de-sac with a dedicated parking area. That's not being considered now because that land hasn't been acquired yet, but that's part of the vision. I think that's a critical element of the plan to really bring order to the end of Lakeline Drive, which is right now, frankly, a mess and unfair to the neighborhood. The trailheads cause significant traffic and parking congestion on Lakeline, especially in the cul-de-sac in front of our house. The parking blocks our mailboxes. There's no parking for residents. It crowds our access to our driveways. Emergency vehicles can't turn around. And an important one to me, people drive up, let their dogs out of their cars off leash at the end of the cul-de-sac. They come to my lawn, most of the time unsupervised, and I have to do the cleanup. Creating a parking area beyond the cul-de-sac will greatly relieve much of this and needs to be done for the benefit of the neighborhood. I understand the plans are considering a small fence to separate the trail from the new lots, and I think that's very important for the reasons I've stated.
That's 2 minutes.
Thank you. I think this will greatly improve the situation for all stakeholders.
Thank you. Go ahead and approach the microphone, and you'll have 2 minutes. State your name for the record.
Hello, thank you for the opportunity to comment. My name is Ross Chambliss. I live on Scenic Drive, which is probably a couple hundred yards to the east of this proposed development. I also submitted a letter in January, email about this proposal. I think my main concern, I'll just say that I recognize the sort of compromise that's been proposed, and I think that's, as far as being able to provide Salt Lake City public lands more open space, which I think is generally, a good compromise. I think mainly my concern as someone who lives in the area, lives downslope from this proposed development, and also a regular user of the trails there, is just the potential for erosion. I think that having the building codes, the limits on not going beyond 30% grades is set for a reason, because erosion is a real thing, and it is something that we see all the time up there. It's significant slope on these grades. So another concern I have is just the proposed lot sizes with this development, which are significantly larger than the average lot sizes that are proposed in this area. I just think it's disproportional to some degree. I wonder if I'm not sure the reason why they are being proposed at that large size. Other concerns too that may not be addressed here, but I was happy to see that the planner expressed concern about or suggested considering further the risk of erosion and the grade development. But anyway, those are the main concerns that I have. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Go ahead and approach the microphone and state your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
Well, I'm Tim Chambliss, and I've lived 1977 Scenic Drive since 1985. I have some concerns because I remember the public hearing before the Planning Commission in August 2001, in which the discussion went for 3.5 hours, and eventually there was a split vote. Commissioners with many qualifications tentatively gave approval. I look at this plan, I see very little difference in the original plan of 24 years ago being put before the commissioners. So I agree with planning staff, with Eric, that additional analysis is needed. And so a question I have also is I remember 2006, 2007, when Salt Lake City, Salt Lake County, the Nature Conservancy bought up the properties of the adjacent areas to have this space be in perpetuity open space. I see this plan encroaching upon what the city agreed and the county agreed to back in 2006, 2007. My other question is, have you made a site visit? Have you gone in the van, gone up there and walked the site? You've walked it. Mr. Tuttle has done it.
I did.
You've done it. That's two. Have the rest of you actually gotten out of the van and walked that area?
Yeah. There's no question. We don't answer questions during the public hearing.
Then I pose it to you as rhetorically and would encourage you to do so. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead and approach the microphone and state your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
My name is Ben Abel, and it's my wife Liz Abel. We live at 1870 South Lakeline Drive. So we just live right below Gary Reimer's property. Concerns we have is when we bought that place in 2013, our realtor and developer looked at that area and said, nobody can build right in front of you. It's all open space. And that kind of does encroach into what would be our view area. We were told that was open space. Nobody can build there. That wouldn't encroach on that. So a win-win, it's a loss for us. We lose view, we lose value in our house. That lot we bought because of the view. It's a beautiful view, and we'd love to share it with you guys if you guys want to come and look at it. We're also concerned about the development in that area. We watched the development of that Canyon Point and how it just totally thrashed Benchmark. And even down upon Scenic and Thunderbird, that area, that water main was broken, 2 or 3 times. And that was because of the development, the trucks, the equipment going up and down. Our road is trash. I mean, you can ask Gary, you can ask Bruce back here. Our road is terrible. And with all that construction, the debris, the material that comes through there, it will even worsen that. Our curbs, our gutter, our sidewalks, they're all sinking in. And with all this development, it would be terrible. And Mr. Turville, we're concerned with how he even cares for his property. We're adjacent to some of his property. He has never cleaned the snow off that. And I think in the 11 years that we've lived there, we've seen him cut down the weeds and brush and everything just, I think, twice. So we're kind of concerned that he won't care for that. When that development is going on, the wind comes to our house. And when that's all going, that would just create a headache for us. We don't object necessarily to the development. We understood that when we moved in, they could have built 5 houses, but it would have been on the north side of that Bonneville Trail, and it would all stay a little bit farther north. That open space would be protected. Our view would be protected.
Yeah, that's 2 minutes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Toto, I love that shirt. Aloha.
Go ahead and state your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Barrows. My family has lived up on Lakeline since before I was born, so over 30 years. And I, again, would second the idea of you guys going up and looking at the site, because although the true Bonneville Shoreline Trail is on that marking, the white line, there's a trail network that spiders out from there that would be massively impacted by this. And also, there are areas that go over 30%. There are some areas that go to 100% grade because there are some small cliffs in that area. But with the sandy loam that's in that area, I would really worry about the erosion that would happen onto Scenic Circle and the houses below, as one of our the other commenters spoke of. The other things that I don't think are taken into account is there's already a park space up at the top of the street, and how that would be affected or needed to be removed, or would that be secondary to this trail network? This is something that the city has already put money into. Why would you guys throw that away without thinking about it? And the other thing that I'm confused about is the developers' seeming need to do this right now. Nothing has happened for 30 years. And it's one of those things that I wonder if maybe this is something that council could think about, is why eminent public domain has not been taken into account. Obviously, I would love that area to be protected as part of a trail network, but it's already, at least according to the people who are on there every day, basically a trail, a public space that is being utilized constantly. And although there are problems with how it's set up right now, it is still a benefit to the community to have that public space and to have it be as large a green space as is already available. So, thank you.
Thank you. State your name for the record and you'll have 2 minutes.
Yeah. My name is Melanie Marier. I live on 2093 Lakeline. And I want to second what the lady before me just said about the public space. I walk there twice a day. And the people that I meet there, all my neighbors, everyone from the neighborhood, I think what I've heard from their concerns is how accessible that trail is. And I see a lot of older people. I see someone with an electric wheelchair. And if there could be in writing somewhere in the requirements that whatever is built to replace that access, that it remains accessible, it's huge value for the neighborhood.
Thank you. State your name for the record and you'll have 2 minutes.
My name is Bruce Alder. I live at 1835 Lakeline Drive. Does that sound funny to you?
Sounds good.
Okay. I built my house and moved in 1992. I live right at the top of Lakeline Drive, across from the access to this property. Somehow I ended up chair of the Arcadia Heights Benchmark Community Council, and we spent a lot of time debating. It seemed like every house that came up for construction in that area, slope was an issue, drainage was an issue, access was an issue. The Turville family approached us a long time ago with 25 lots or more. We fought with them for a long time trying to come up with what we thought was a reasonable solution to the property. And I'm pleased now to see that the Turville family has come with the development that they've proposed. As Mr. Turville mentioned, they could very easily put a couple of homes right at the entrance to this property, effectively blocking the shoreline trail. To Mr. Chambliss' statement, about 2006, Salt Lake City promised us that they would create or somehow establish a right-of-way for the Bonneville Shoreline Trail on top of the pipeline where it is, or where we all believe it is. That was never done. The property is privately owned. Mr. Turville has a right to include that property in the lots he sells, and the trail would have to move. I personally think there's pros and cons to this, but I think the public comes away really well served. As Mr. Reimer mentioned, the possibility of adding a parking lot for trails is huge. The open space that would be maintained above the trail is also a huge issue. And then you've got a tremendous amount of property downstream or downhill that is also open space, and it ends this development once and for all. I wrote you a letter, and personally I think after everything I've seen for my 35 years, whatever it's been, this is a win-win for everybody. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to give public comment? Have we received any emails?
Not since your staff report's been published. So
Thanks. We will go ahead and close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission for discussion and a motion.
Well, I have a list of questions that possibly could be discussion. So staff, please. So some of these are just technical ones in the weeds. In that, in your staff report, you talked about that the applicant is in discussion with Public Lands to purchase the above open space, but it's not a condition on your recommendation. If that sale falls through because for a number of reasons, would then any approval for the plan development be nullified, or would we have to make that an actual condition that sale must go through to Public Lands in order for this to be approved? And the other question that's somewhat related to that, and probably a similar answer, is the question of the potential trailhead, perhaps parking lot, in that if the houses are developed prior to that component of this balancing act, then what is there to enforce that we actually do get those components to this proposal as well? So it's
for a trailhead.
Yeah. And so I think it's a broader question of the things that are in the works of like what would be community benefits to ensure that those things actually come to fruition. And do those things need to be conditioned, or are they just part of, yes, those will happen, or do they need to be separately conditioned in order to make sure that they occur?
Okay, so I'm not sure that it would be appropriate to condition something on the sale to public lands per se, because there's different components to that, but that this area be designated open space. I mean, most of it is zoned open space. Well, and the area that you see here in yellow, or I can go to others, is not open space. It's zoned FR2. But those could, let's see, I'm sorry. Maybe this is a better one. So yeah, you can see this gray area here in the, let me make that bigger. This area here is not, or this is FR2 zoned right here. So yeah, designating
So
this
potentially,
parcel A as
potentially the condition to kind of ensure that ends up happening, not necessarily contingent on the sale to public lands, but that particular portion of this project be zoned as open space could be a condition to ensure that happens. My concern, I think you get what my concern is,
yeah,
and I'm trying to navigate
sure if
what the
Attorney's
most
office wants to
appropriate.
weigh in on a requirement to rezone a property.
Yeah.
But maybe dedicating it for open space. It does talk about the designation and preservation of that trail, so designating that and the 10-foot easement through there. So, you know, I think that could be appropriate to clarify a designation of that parcel A.
So that's one of my concerns.
And then
Yeah.
your other question on the amenities, that is just envisioned in the East Bench master plan and in other master plans of the city.
Okay.
But there is no particular plan, there's no funding, there's no engineering that's been done. That's just a vision for the future.
Okay.
And one of the purposes that Public Lands would like to acquire this land. So I think
Okay.
I don't know that it goes beyond that, especially at this stage.
Okay. One of my other questions is in your proposed conditions, number 3, that a geotechnical evaluation related to slope and waterway protection and mitigation be performed prior to building permits being issued. How is that insufficient to meet what why are you proposing to continue this to further study a 30% slope, and how is your condition number 3 proposed not actually achieving what you need?
So I can jump in here. I think our biggest concern is that we have several potential similar subdivisions elsewhere in the city where the steep slope provision kicks in, where they're asking for modifications, which are fairly significant. And we want to make sure that we're being consistent with all of, not just those pending decisions, which some of them will come before you, but some of them are administrative level, that they're consistent across with those, but also consistent with how we've applied this in the past to other subdivisions. And so we want to do some research to figure out that we're achieving that. And unfortunately, that wasn't caught before we published the staff report and scheduled the public hearing.
So then what is your proposed timeline if an extension were voted on tonight that you would come back?
I don't think we know the answer to that yet.
I have a question. That one of the participants in the public hearing suggested that there was no easement on the shoreline trail, but there is an easement on the shoreline trail. Is that right? A public easement?
There's a water line utility easement.
But that's a public easement, isn't it? Or is it not?
Well, it's an easement for a specific purpose. That doesn't mean it's a broad easement for public access and everything else.
I see.
A public utility is not a public access easement.
Okay, thank you very much. But it does mean that they can't build on top of it.
Correct.
Okay.
So as a discussion item for other commissioners, I mean, I think that this is a balancing act. There's a lot that the community at large gains by this proposal. You know, the applicant's not asking for a rezone, so they can't build on this. And what they're asking for is a reposition of those homes. So, you know, our discussion tonight is that appropriate? I'm more concerned with figuring out a way to ensure that what is being proposed as the benefit to the community is something that will actually occur. Because I think we've seen many instances that I don't have enough fingers to count on, where we're offered one thing that is supposed to be an enticement of like, this is a great thing to the community, and then eventually the proposal doesn't include that because then they decided they couldn't do it. And there are a lot of things at play here. So there's a lot of benefits, I think, that we need to take into account. But we shouldn't just assume that those will all come to fruition without some sort of conditioning or direction that we're safeguarding those benefits and that balance.
Mr. Chair, can I add a comment to that? One way that the commission can ensure certain things happen, and this is going to go into a little bit of technical stuff with recorded plats, but when something is put on a recorded plat, like a public access easement, utility easements, though the city becomes the owner, or whoever those are dedicated to, becomes the owner of that. And so if the concern is that guaranteeing that we have access to the trail, that's a pretty easy thing to require be shown on the final plat, right? That there's a public access easement across that. The issue with the potential sale or transaction of real property to the city or to any other group that would hold those rights to land is a little bit trickier, right? Because we don't control the purse, right? Other people get to make that decision. But the one thing that I would refer you, there's two things I think that are important. So Eric, the area in red up there is the area that is potentially going to be purchased, right?
Correct.
So if I remember correctly on the steep slope map, that is almost all of it, except with the portions that are zoned FR2 near the trail, are over 30%. So our code requires that land as part of this subdivision, whether it's dedicated or not, to be identified as undevelopable. And so that would be on the plat. Furthermore, because the areas that are zoned FR2 near the access to the trail, one on here, there's no developable area identified on the plat for that area. So in order to build anything there would have to be a subdivision amendment to establish that. And so that would trigger an additional future process if that were ever to occur. But if there's a public access easement across that property, that would become a city interest, and only the city council can vacate a public access easement on a plat. So they would be the ones who would have to decide in order to do that. So there are some plats have a lot of legal ramifications, and there are protections that oftentimes go above and beyond what the zoning requires and what enforcement for someone who doesn't follow through with something entail.
Thank you. I think that achieves what I'm really going after. And so would it be appropriate then to create a condition that that we record on the plat a guaranteed access to the trail in that FR2 area, if just as that, and then of course if it is sold to public lands, then that takes care of that as well. But would that be inappropriate?
There is an easement shown on the plat for the trail, but the FR2 portion in red does not have an easement as was stated.
Right, and so that's what I'm suggesting. Is it appropriate?
That would be above and beyond what's currently shown.
So you can require that easement connect to Lakeline Drive.
So, and that's what I was going after. Thank you.
A reminder that staff's recommendation is a motion to continue on both items.
Mr. Chair, I'm prepared to make a motion for PLM 2023-00890 Kerrigan View Plan Development. Based on the information presented and the discussion, I move that the Commission continue this plan development application as recommended by staff and keep the public meeting open.
I'll second.
We have a motion from Commissioner Scheer and a second from Commissioner Gale. Any discussion to the motion? Let's take a vote. Commissioner Gale.
Yes.
Commissioner Scheer.
Yes.
Commissioner Burrows.
Yes.
Commissioner Tuttle.
Yes.
Commissioner Berry.
Yes.
Commissioner Scott.
Yes.
Commissioner Santos Rivera.
Yes.
And the chair also votes yes. That motion to continue passes unanimously. And we
Mr.
have
Chair, can we take a 5-minute break?
we need to take a vote or make a motion on the
Oh
other.
yeah, after that, you're right. Sorry. My apologies.
So,
I forgot.
Mr. Chair, I can make a motion on the second motion on PLN SUB S 2024-00219 Kerrigan View preliminary subdivision. I would like to make just a statement that we would like to see in the subdivision when it returns some indication of the right-of-way of the trail. Based on the information presented and discussion, I move that the Commission continue this preliminary subdivision application as recommended by staff.
I'll second.
We have a motion from Commissioner Scheer and a second from Commissioner Gale. Any discussion to the motion? Let's take a vote. Commissioner Scheer,
Yes.
Commissioner Burrows,
Yes.
Commissioner Scott,
Yes.
Commissioner Barry,
Yes.
Commissioner Tuttle,
Yes.
Commissioner Gale,
Yes.
Commissioner Santos Rivera.
Yes.
And the chair also votes yes. That motion to continue passes unanimously. And let's take a 5-minute break and come back at 7:21. Commission's portion of the agenda. And our briefing item is zoning consolidation project. The MU5, MU6, MU8, and MU11 zoning districts. And Director Nick Norris will be presenting.
Thank you. The good news about this presentation is that all of this information you've already seen over the years and have worked with at least some of these zones or what will be these zones. And so we don't need to go into as much depth, but because of how we're using these presentations, we're going to timestamp these and post them on our project website when we go out. I'm going to start from the beginning, but I'm going to go through it very, very quick. So these are the three things that we're going to be covering, except the MU2 and MU3 stuff. We did that last time, but our project goals for this consolidation are to align our zoning with our land use policies, improve the consistency within our code and how it's administered, reduce redundancies in terms of duplicative regulations and sections in our code, and reduce conflicts within our code. We have a number of guiding principles. We want to maintain existing property rights as much as possible, so we're trying to minimize the scope of change. We're trying to also minimize creating new non-conforming uses or non-complying buildings. We want to keep the regulations that are known to work, and part of our engagement process will be helping to identify that. And ultimately, we want to promote more mixed-use development within the city. To accomplish this, we're going to be using what is commonly referred to as a form-based code. In Salt Lake City, we have this already. They're what's called a building type focused code. So the code includes defines certain types of buildings, and then each building has regulations built around them. So the regulations focus on where a building's placed on the property, the dimensions, obviously, the various components of the building, and then overall connectivity of the building to public spaces. The building location is dictated by primarily the setbacks, the number of buildings on the lot, and things like that. There's also some lot coverage regulations in some zones that help dictate where and the mass of a building. The building mass is also determined by its height, its width, its roof shape, the lot coverage, and any sort of size limitation that may be applicable to the zone. The components consist of multiple things. I'm not going to repeat all of these because you can see them in the presentation, but these are the things that you visibly see from the street. In our code, we have a number of connectivity requirements. Most of these are common for zoning, right? Driveways, parking locations, things like that. Because of our unique, very large blocks, we also have mid-block walkway requirements. You've also seen this project summary. These are the 4 higher-end MU zones that we're proposing, and on the left column is the name of the new district. The middle column are the existing zones, and then some notes about how what zones become what is this. One thing to note, since we gave you the overall summary of this project, we have removed the RMF 75 from this proposal, simply because it complicates things, and instead we're probably going to make some adjustments to the land use tables for the RMF 75 to address some office retail uses on the ground floors or lower levels of buildings. The good news is that at least right now, as of yesterday, last night, all of these zones are now officially adopted in one form or the other. So most of this is relocating them to a new section of our code, and then making some minor changes to some of those things, especially things that we've had issues with or that have been identified as at least 2 of these zones have been utilized over the last several years. At the last time, we unfortunately neglected to have the map of where these MU zones are. Don't worry, I'm going to zoom in on this, so you don't need to look at such a small area. But this is the entire city that has some MU zone in there. You can see the legends and the colors. In this, we have not broken them up by existing zoning districts instead. We've shown this as what the zoning map will look like if this were to be adopted. So all the districts that are proposed to be combined into one group are shown in their own similar color. To give you an idea of where these things are in the city, I'm also not going to read all these locations, but you can see that the MU2, the MU3s, those are the orange and reds, are really scattered and mixed throughout our neighborhoods. There are a few corridors that have particularly the MU3 zone, and some of the MU2. You can see those in red right in kind of towards the middle bottom of these maps. And then the kind of some well-known areas are highlighted and labeled here so you can get an idea of what's where. The southern portion of the city, same kind of thing, gives you an idea of what's where. I'll leave this up for a minute so you can digest it at your as you will. The one thing that this map doesn't show, I didn't zoom out, and we brought this up last time, but the 5600 West corridor, which is currently zoned CG, will not be rezoned to an MU zone. Instead, that CG zone, those CG zone properties will match the surrounding M1 properties. This is the zoning map that was adopted last night by the city council. It has not, other than the MU8 zone, because this is officially now, well, once its ordinance is published, officially one of the new zoning districts in the city, but you can see the areas that are labeled as FBUN2. Those become, on this map, all of those, I believe, will be MU5. I don't think there's any of the 65-foot height range in this area. And then the RMU zones would be also be MU8. And if you recall, when this was before the Planning Commission, there was some question as to whether those RMU zones should just be changed to MU8 at that time. And ultimately that didn't happen. And ironically, the city council had the exact same questions. So focusing on some of the MU5 zoning districts, each of the allowed building types are across the top. These are the kind of the core standards that are in that zone right now. These are the current FBUN2 regulations for these 5 different building types that are allowed in this zone. One of the, it's not so much in this zone, but and then MU6, which is essentially the exact same as MU5. The only difference is the multifamily storefront and mixed use have a higher 65-foot versus a 50-foot, and then the cottage developments are also have a higher allowed building height. The MU8 zone, very similar. This zone only has the 4 allowed building types, and this ultimately maximum building height is up to 90 feet. One of the things that we're going to get to some of the questions that we have already started to get some public input on things, even though the only thing that's public is what has been presented to the Planning Commission, so or the City Council. But one of the comments we've received is particularly in some of these higher end zones, is whether or not a front or corner setback is necessary on streets where we have really wide park strips and sidewalks already, and if that's the case, should that setback be reduced? So that's something we're going to look at. A good example of this, which you've seen several projects, and in fact one tonight, is on Main Street, really south of south of 900 South, where we start to get the really wide park strips on Main Street. I think they're 30 feet. And so they're already providing quite a bit of green space, which is really the primary reason why we'd have those front yard setbacks. The MU11 zoning district, this is the most intense. This would be replacing 3 different zones. The CG zone, which is mostly found along the 300 West corridor south of about 800 South, and the Sugar House Business District 1, which is the core of Sugar House, and then one of the TSA zones, the Urban Center Core, which is only mapped around the North Temple Bridge, the Hardware Village area. So you can see these provisions here. They're all very, very similar, organized to the other zones. Some of the additional regulations, I've already talked about mid-block walkways, but now this will be something that's more of a focus across the board. In our subdivision regulations, you may recall when we adopted those earlier this year and when they were presented to the Planning Commission in the tail end of last year, any subdivision over a certain acres in any zone that allows a residential use, so that would apply to these as well, is going to be required to either plat and dedicate streets or mid-block walkways based on the block size and overall size of that subdivision. And so that's another provision that kicks in for these types of developments. We've also added some provisions for buildings without street frontage. This was particularly in what is currently called the FBU N11 zone, which the Planning Commission saw several years ago. It was kind of stopped at the city council level and then adopted the tail end of last year. One of the things that we're really struggling to figure out are the ground floor use requirements on certain streets. So right now in our code, we only have 3 or 4 places where ground floor commercial uses are required. That's Main Street in the D1 zone and Sugar House on 2100 South and 11th East or Highland Drive in those Sugar House Business District zones. And then the FBUN 11 has, and the what is now the MU8 have specific streets where those are required to. So we're going to try to figure out how to do that. And then the smaller zones, MU2, MU3, will also have some ground floor residential requirement unless it's already an existing residential use. So the major design standards, we're also going through trying to simplify some of the really confusing design standards that we have. These are the core things that we see all the time and that you're familiar with. The design of the ground floor, the building materials, the building length, a few upper level requirements, and then the parking garage requirements. I wanted to show some different examples of buildings that have been built in. Some of these have utilized these existing zones. Some of these have utilized other zones, but just show the variety of things that are being built. Some of these have gone through the Planning Commission, so you may be familiar with these. In fact, I think all 3 of these projects the Planning Commission reviewed. The one on the left is in the near the Hardware building off of 400 West and right along the 500 West rail corridor. It's under construction, but some of these townhomes are actually occupied at this point. The one in the middle was a planned development in the West Capitol Hill area. And then the one on the right, I'm trying to remember what street that is, but I think it's Main Street. Yeah, Main Street and maybe 1500-ish south. The MU5 district. So most of these buildings are between 4 and 5. The 2 on the bottom are actually the result were developed under one of the existing form-based zones. So one is on 300 West in the Central 9th neighborhood. The other one is along the S line at 700 East. And then the top 2, these are actually both in the CC zone and went through design review to get the additional 15 feet of height. And they're both at the 45-foot height limit. The MU6, so 2 of these buildings, actually all 3 of these buildings are in one of the existing form-based zones. These are the one on the left, actually, and these are all in the 65-foot height range that's allowed. So you can kind of see what they're producing. The left one, the one in the center are both in the Central 9th neighborhood, and then the one on the right is on 700 East in Sugar House along the S line. Let's see why. There we go. Similar with the MU8 district. So these buildings are all in between, 75 and pushing 90 feet in height. Again, near the hardware development on the left, 200 South near the Gateway is the next one in, and then the top right is on 400 South in a TSA zone, and then the bottom right is actually the other part of that townhome development I was telling you about that's along 500 West. Also went through design review with the Planning Commission, so you're starting to see some of these projects that you saw maybe 2 or 3 years ago become nearly completed. The MU11 district is very hard to find examples in the city. Both of these buildings are actually in the same development, but this is in a zone that allows buildings up to 125 feet, and both of these pushed that, went through the design review actually in the D4 zone, because that's one of the zones that allows that height, but it gives you an idea of what you can expect to see with buildings of this scale. I already talked about some of the challenges here. We talked a little bit about the setbacks and how do if there's some room for flexibility with wide park strips. Interesting to note too is that sometimes when a building is more than 30 feet away from the curb where a fire truck can park, there becomes fire code issues. And so that could be another reason why we may want to consider options for reducing setbacks if that's the case. The ground floor uses, which I know you're familiar with. And then one of the things is we're updating the design standards chapter. And many of you have sent us comments about things that have been built, asking why they turned out the way they did. And that's partly because the standards in, say, the CB zone are written for commercial buildings, even though residential buildings are allowed. So one of the things that we're looking at is that potentially having different design standards based on the building type. So they still may have the same list of standards, but they might have different requirements. So a row house or a residential building on the ground floor probably has different glass. It's appropriate for different percentages of glass than, say, a retail storefront. So those are the kinds of things that we're looking at. And that is the end of my presentation. So it's pretty short tonight, but happy to take any direction, advice.
So, Nick, I have one kind of bubbling concern, and that is the MU11 to the Sugar House Business District 1. And partly what I'm maybe a little concerned about is we've allowed some creep of Business District 1 to the west, or I don't know that an MU11 with its proximity to the residential is, I'm concerned that might be the most appropriate. And I'm talking about Snellgrove, but then I am pretty sure, I don't know this for a fact, but I'm pretty sure then north of that, they're going to want the same zone as they are probably getting ready to do whatever they want to propose. And because initially the Business District 1 zone was more confined, but now we've, over these years, allowed some of that to creep out. I don't know that an MU11 blanket is, I'm just concerned that that's probably maybe not the most compatible height allowance for as it's related to its surrounding residential areas.
Yeah.
And
sure. Well, what we can do is, I actually realized I had one more slide, but we can look at those boundaries in the Sugar House to see what it is. I think that might be a
great time to actually reevaluate the boundaries of Business District 1, because we have had some creep with it, and if we redo this. And I don't know that I would want to see, I mean, if we were looking at 125-foot building down the slope down towards Highland, great. Up on 13th East, that could really accentuate it and make it look even taller because it's up on the hill. And so is that what we want to see? And those buildings are aging up there.
Yeah.
So it's not unlikely that we wouldn't see those potentially change. And just because the topography, that's a huge elevation gain from 11th to 13th. And is that is that what we want to see? Because I think below, in the core of the business district, that's fine. But the creep and then the elevation gain just makes me wonder if a blanket MU11 is the best zone for those like outliers. So reevaluating maybe the boundaries of where we want to see that is appropriate.
All right.
I'm a little concerned though that if we start going into changing boundaries in this particular effort, that we're causing more. I mean, I'm not opposed to changing the boundaries. I'm just saying that this particular effort is more of a clarification of the rules and a consolidation of the zoning districts. And if we start talking about, oh well, then we'll change this boundary and that boundary, that we're going to get into a gigantic mess. That's my only concern with trying to get this accomplished in my lifetime.
Well, I hope you're still around by the end of this year, because that's my goal.
I think that's a fair point.
Yeah.
So I definitely feel like that's just throwing it back to you to figure out what you feel is doable and the best approach.
Our initial thought is that there would not be very significant map rezoning of properties other than, aligning them to match the MU zones. But there may be that we identify areas where that should be a future thing to consider. But we can obviously go through all that as part of the process. I did want to bring up our tentative schedule with the commission, so that people can see when we're going to start talking about some of the big meatier parts on this. So the end of June 20th, and I'm hoping every one of these dates are right, but they should be. We're going to talk about the design standards, so you can see how those are changing and how they're working. And I'm going to underscore this during this entire time, there will be public engagement activities that are doing this too. So this is not just it. Then we'll talk about parking. We're probably going to have our first public hearing at the July 31st meeting. Please note that it was moved to July 31st because the 24th is a holiday, which would be the fourth Thursday. So we're also going to advertise that in June so that we can utilize some of our year-end budget savings, because this costs a lot of money to meet all of the state requirements for noticing. And then we'll talk about the land use tables. And then towards the end of August, we're going to show you all of the other sections. Most of those are they're changing references and names and things like that. There's some that might have some meaningful code changes, and that's what we'll focus on then. And then look for either the second or either meeting in September for a second public hearing, and then we'll go from there and determine when we can come back for a potential recommendation from the Planning Commission.
I think last time we talked about, the 8 and the MU11, these indicate roughly the height of the building. And I think that we had asked you to consider how we can incentivize higher floor to floors ratio in all of these districts, whether or not it's 11 stories and we don't care how tall it is, or something like something like that. So I still am interested in that incentivization of higher ceilings everywhere in all of these codes.
Yeah, we'll definitely, we have that down on our list of things to look at, so.
One thought I have is on the ground floor retail or the ground floor commercial requirements. Is it a feasible ask to require space that could be either commercial or residential that could be converted as the market changes?
Yeah, so that's a requirement that's currently in the TSA zones for buildings that front on North Temple and 400 South. So they have to be built to a standard that can change the use. And that may be, in most cases, the approach we take, especially where we have, the 300 West corridor is going to have so many side streets or state main corridors. It's perfectly acceptable to have residential on side streets in those areas. And so those are the things that we're balancing, trying to figure out. That's it.
Well, thank you. We will go ahead and move to our final item, which is vice chair election.
Mr. Chair, I have a motion to make.
Yes.
Recommendation. So I would nominate Amy Burrows for vice chair position.
Second.
That was quick. Do you accept? Awesome, thank you.
Wait, there's a discussion for the motion? Point of order.
Well, it was to nominate.
Yes.
She has to accept before we can move
Has
forward.
exhibit everything that a vice chair need, which is being firm, friendly, and what else? I don't know. She's always been to every single planning commission. Like, I think she has a perfect attendance, so I think she deserves it.
Yes.
Close enough. So we have a motion from Commissioner Barry, and who did the second? Okay, Commissioner Santos Rivera did the second. Oh, that's a good question.
I did nominate.
Yeah, it's a nomination.
So I will then make the motion. I move that we accept Amy Burrows for vice chair.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion from Commissioner Barry and a second from Commissioner Santos Rivera. Any discussion to the motion?
Yeah, on the record, Burrows have exhibit being fair, friendly, and there's another one I forgot. Fair, friendly, and firm. There you go. Firm, friendly, and
fair.
Fair. And she had almost perfect attendance. So I cannot think about anyone else who can do that job better than her.
Okay, let's go ahead and take a vote. Commissioner Gale,
Yes.
Commissioner Tuttle,
Yes.
Commissioner Barry,
Yes.
Commissioner Scott,
Yes.
Commissioner Burrows,
Yes.
Commissioner Scheer,
Yes.
Commissioner Santos Rivera.
For the very last time, C.
And the chair also votes C. So that passes unanimously. And thank you. And also thanks to Carlos for his service as a vice chair and on the Planning Commission in general. And we wish him well in everything. And with that, we'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting.